we always define today and especially tomorrow in terms of what we understood yesterday. And the one of the underlying themes of Techlash is that we can't deal with the new digital challenges using industrial era statutes and structures.
This is Emily Olman, and I am here today with Tom Wheeler, who is the former chairman of the FCC. He was the 31st chairman of the FCC. He is an author of now 4 books, if I am correct, and with the newest one coming out actually on October 15th, which is called Techlash. And it is going to be a topic of discussion for us today that I'm very excited about. And Tom is also a former CEO, a leading figure in the cable industry, leading figure in the cellular and telecommunications industry. Tom, it is such a pleasure to sit down with you and to chat. Thank you so much.
Hello, Emily. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see, Tom, you're also at the Brookings Institute right now, and that is how I found your writings. So over the last month or so, I've been doing a lot of thinking about regulations, a lot of thinking about the metaverse, about even the drone industry, which is something that I'm very interested in. And I realized that there's not an equivalent, or I couldn't find an equivalent regulating body such as the FAA that I felt like was really managing the metaverse. Right there,
Right.
there wasn't anything like that. And so I found your article, which you had published in July of this year. And that was something that you wrote while at the Brookings Institute. And let me see if I can get the title of this. AI makes rules for the metaverse even more important, July 2023. So Tom, you wrote this article and it really resonated with me. Can you talk to me about what was on your mind when you decided to write this piece?
Well, I think, Emily, you have just, in this question, identified the 2 key things that I was thinking about. One is, you're right. There's nobody to turn to right now for guidance or guardrails. And in fact, the messages that we hear from Nick Clegg or Mark Zuckerberg or whomever is, we've got plenty of time to work this out. We know what the problems are, and we've got all kinds of time to work them out. And I've spent my last 40 years in the intersection of technology and public policy. And I think the lesson we've learned is that no, we don't have time to work these things out.
Yeah.
That if you don't deal with them early on and establish expectations, that then by the time you do get around to saying, oh my God, look what has happened here, they are entrenched economically, they're entrenched politically, they're entrenched in people's lives, and dealing with them is infinitely more difficult. So what I was proposing in the article, the Brookings article that you cited, was that we need to step up to that now. And the thing that's somewhat frustrating is that, for a while, the metaverse was on everybody's lips, and the metaverse is going to do this, and the metaverse. And then all of a sudden AI came along and blew the metaverse off the front pages.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to say in that piece is that we have to continue to think about the metaverse, because when we talk about AI, we are talking about the metaverse. It is AI that is powering the capabilities of this wondrous new activity that we've dubbed the metaverse. So that was kind of the threshold thought process as to why I wrote the piece. And in my new book, Techlash, who makes the rules for the digital gilded age, that issue is very key. And there's a whole chapter on the metaverse and AI, separate chapter on AI. But the question is, who is going to make the rules? And what we've learned thus far in the last several decades of the internet, of the web in specific, is that it is the innovators who have been making the rules. God bless them, because that's the way progress always happens. Innovators always make the rules because they can see the future. That's how we've advanced in business. That's how we've advanced in science. That's how we've advanced in art. But at some point in time, when those rules that are designed for self-interest end up imposing on the rights of others and the public interest, it's necessary to step in, create guardrails to rebalance the equation. And so what Techlash talks about are developments such as the metaverse, developments such as AI, their historical analog in the original Gilded Age, and what we need to be doing going forward to deal with the challenges created by the new technologies.
I mean, this is a big, big question. And if, for example, you were the chairman of the FCC, and so if the person who had, in some ways, the most control, or was able to have the best view, let's put it that way, you had the best view over whatever was happening, and you had come from industry, so you saw it from both sides. I think that for me, it was a big, I wouldn't say it was an alarm, but it was certainly a huge cause for concern that I am also in the XR industry. I am working in frontier technology. I love frontier technology. And I also am very pro creativity and pro innovation.
Right.
But
As am I.
Right. And I think you are too. And so I think that at the same time, without having guardrails, and the US, for example, also sort of lagging behind its European counterparts in the ability to work together to create guardrails or rules, then what is the priority here, and how can we feel any sense of security that there is going to be a place we can turn to, or there can be some sort of I guess it's accountability in this world? Because if there isn't accountability, then it can run amok. And I think that that's the big concern that I have, is like, look, I support all these things, but I also feel like this is a huge red flag. And so when I read your article, and I'm like, oh, wow. And look who it's coming from. It's coming from somebody who has had 40 years of experience in industry, who was at the highest level in our government supporting these very issues. Then where are we at? Where are we headed, and what can we do? Right? These are huge concerns, and so Techlash, and of course AI, as one of the chapters, and the metaverse is a chapter. They're big. They're so big, Tom, and I don't know that people have really wrapped their heads around how big these are and how much they will impact society, because I feel like we're right at that precipice where it's going from being very sort of like not mass adoption to heading into mass adoption.
Right.
And so that means that a lot of money can be made, but people will not understand at what cost. And they've seen it in the internet, they've seen it in telecommunications, but the metaverse is still somewhat of a fuzzy concept for people still.
Well, as you were talking, Emily, I was hearkening back to a conversation I once had with the Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the late Madeleine Albright, in which we were talking about the impact of technology on diplomacy. And she said, the problem in diplomacy is that we take 21st century challenges, define them in 20th century terms, and propose 19th century solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I started laughing and I said, Madam Secretary, I'm going to steal that line because that is spot on where we are in dealing with technology. We always define today and especially tomorrow in terms of what we understood yesterday. And the one of the underlying themes of Techlash is that we can't deal with the new digital challenges using industrial era statutes and structures. You've referenced a couple of times that when I was chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, one of the frustrations of that job was dealing with the issues raised by the internet and digital technology using a statute that was written in 1934 when television didn't even exist and updated in 1996 when the internet was AOL.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the recommendations that I make in Techlash is that we need to cleave from the old industrial way of thinking about things, and we need a new, focused digital agency in the federal government that is staffed by individuals with digital DNA and that is based on a statute that does not follow the model of all other regulatory agencies, i.e. industrial era agencies, but adopts oversight techniques that are patterned after the behaviors of the digital companies themselves. So what do I mean by that? Industrial era regulation is micromanagement. This is how you will operate. And as such, it is inherently anti-innovative. I mean, you don't get innovation in a world that is being micromanaged by regulators. But at the same point in time, those who have argued against regulation like to point to that fact and ignore that it is the wrong kind of oversight for the rapid pace, dynamic digital era. And so what I propose in Techlash is a new structure that frankly is cloned from the way in which the digital companies themselves operate, which is based on transparency, which is based on risk management, which is based on agility. And how do we bring those concepts into government so that we can both establish guardrails and create an environment that is conducive to innovation?
Wow. Okay. So, Tom, I think that it is a radical proposal. It is a radical proposal, but it is a brilliant proposal. And I will tell you that idea that government oversight and government regulations currently, not only are they hearkening back to the 19th century in some cases, but it also moves too slowly. And I
Right.
think that this is really the crux of it all, is that the speed at which things are changing and happening, and the fluidity and the dynamism. You used the word dynamic. Okay, so dynamism and the speed at which all of these changes happen in the metaverse, in AI, it is instantaneous. And I love the idea of there being a digital, I'm not sure if we would call it an agency. I haven't read the book yet, but I am looking forward to reading the book, that would be able to keep pace and respond very quickly. And I also, I read from Gutenberg to Google,
Oh,
and
good. Thank you.
you're welcome. One of your previous books came out in 2019, and what I think was really relevant to this discussion about that is, of course, the speed. Right. So you were talking about the locomotive. You were talking about networks. You were talking about how people couldn't believe, and they were testifying, I believe, before Congress, saying, "I couldn't believe. Like, can you take this iron horse 20 miles per
Right.
hour? Can you
Right.
take it 30 miles per hour?" And
Right.
they're laughed at. Right?
Right.
They're laughed at because no one believes that it's possible. Now, in frontier technology and in AI and in the circles that I'm in, everybody knows how quickly, and they know the good and they know the bad. They know exactly how much can change in an instant, and that AI is also evolving, right? And so as it evolves, because it's based on additional inputs from the internet, from all of us, uh, we're going to need to work at a faster pace. We're going to need to think about these challenges in a more responsive, in a more, I would say, not reactionary, but if transparency perhaps is a word that you use to describe this entity, well, maybe that transparency coupled with, hey, we're figuring it out too,
Right.
and a little bit of sort of graciousness around, this is very uncharted territory for everyone, but look, we have a lot of precedent set that we can look back to. And you always referenced, I loved reading your book because you reference so many historical moments in time where history is now perhaps repeating itself, but yet it's a whole new lesson. So yeah, I'm fascinated by this notion, and I think it's desperately needed. It's the gaping hole that led me to reach out to you, because I saw that there was no one, right? There was no government agency or regulator. It's all sort of self-driven at this point, and that is not going to help. That's not going to help the majority of people.
Well, and we need to think about, how do we get as innovative in our oversight as the companies and the innovators were themselves. And that's a high hurdle. How do we think about agility? I mean, every time your smartphone updates, it's an example of agile management in the digital environment. How do we bring that kind of agile thinking into government? And my concept is, not only do we need an agency, kind of the headline is the agency, but that agency has to behave differently. And I think that just as we stole, that's probably a tough word, as we cloned the management techniques of the industrial era for industrial oversight, we need to clone the management techniques of the digital era for digital oversight. And one of those techniques is the use of standards. I mean, the companies, when they're looking forward and saying, okay, how do I now make sure that I have that I can mitigate, I can identify and mitigate potential problems, technical problems in my offering of the product, they develop collectively standards. I mean, how did we go from 1G to 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G and now 6G in mobile phones? As technology changed, as the marketplace changed, a new standard came in. And so we need to bring that kind of agility into government. And I think we do it by the same process, that the agency would pull together a team representing industry, civil society, and say, here's the topic. Here is, if you will, a plaintiff's brief for why we think it is a problem and the issues that need to be dealt with. You've got X number of months to come back to us with an answer. We have the opportunity to review and edit that answer, and that answer will become a behavioral code that we can then enforce. So what is the code about the privacy of personal information? What is the code about interoperability that can promote innovation? What's the code about how you deal with misinformation? And we need, and it is developed collectively, and again, in an agile kind of way that it can always be responsive. And you know, this becomes all the more important when we talk about AI. Because as you know, AI has leapt the barrier insofar as moving out of big tech companies, and open source is now allowing two guys and a dog in a garage in Latvia to develop AI models. And we need to establish expectations for the effects of those models, rather than thinking that we're going to go in and micromanage how the models work themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, an agency, I think when many Americans think about another agency, this can sort of get them thinking government regulation is bad. Government regulation is going to stymie growth. This is not going to be, this will be stepping on my First Amendment rights, right? Which is one of the things that the FCC had as a challenge in terms of regulating the internet, because the First Amendment rights would potentially be trampled on, right? Freedom of speech, etc. What would you say is the low-hanging fruit for regulation or oversight in this new digital era with AI? Where could we potentially see what I would say would be early wins or the initial ways? Would you say it's privacy? Is it data? What are the things that we should be the most concerned about?
Well, the problem, Emily, the answer to that starts with how you define AI. AI is kind of like this huge elephant, or if you want to go back to Greek mythology, the hydra-headed monster, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there are levels in dealing with it. I mean, so for instance, AI makes things that are currently unacceptable worse. I mean, fraud, for instance. It can help somebody pull off fraudulent activities, do it better, do it faster, make it look more real. But there are laws against fraud, and Lena Khan, the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, had that great comment the other day when she said that there is no AI exception in existing law. So fraud, discrimination, financial activities, etc. We've got laws that can deal with that are not AI, that can capture AI as well. You go up a step, and we get to the problems that we haven't dealt with for the last couple of decades. You mentioned them: privacy, competition, truth and trust. And those only become worse as a result of AI and the metaverse. And we keep sticking our head in the sand about them. So we need to be dealing with them as kind of the threshold pathway into the broader issue of, the unknown unknowns of the AI, of AI. And I think that the key to that is we need to continue to think in terms of the effects of the technology. You mentioned my previous book, From Gutenberg to Google. One of the conclusions of that book was that it is never the primary technology that is transformational, but its secondary effects. Mm-hmm. And we need to be focusing on the effects that are delivered by AI, and because we don't know what they're going to be, but we got to be agile enough to recognize and respond to them when they do come. But the idea that we're going to go in and regulate LLMs, for instance, I fear is a fool's errand, largely because of how open source changes all that. Sam Altman, bless his heart, made a terrific recommendation that there be licensing of AI. I used to, at the FCC, I ran the nation's largest licensing program for all the airwaves, the spectrum for broadcasting and cell phones and satellites and everything else. And licensing is a very cumbersome way that is anti-competitive on its face, because you're saying to others, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be real careful about how we, again, encourage competition, which drives innovation. And again, I think that comes back to, how do you have an agile structure that looks at the effects and establishes codes of behavior around those effects?
So the book Techlash, right? And exactly, I think that the agility and the codes, we are at the beginning of a very long, I think, evolution of our country to try to manage or support or even wrap our heads around all of this. And I wouldn't say that even for example, I live in California, is the Attorney General of California, who is perhaps currently the person who might be responsible for, at least having regulations in California.
Right.
Is that person paying attention to this? Is that person able to contain all that AI will be and is already? And it's too big. It's very, very big. But I wanted to come back to Techlash because the title of the book has a metaphor in it, or maybe not so much metaphor, but it says, who makes the rules in the digital gilded age?
Right.
And you talk about, in the beginning of the book, in the introduction, you talk about the Gilded Age at the turn of the century, the 20th century. And that gilded is sort of this thin coating of gold.
Right.
Can you talk to me about why the thin coating of gold also applies to today's tech giants?
Well, it was Mark Twain who coined the term the Gilded Age, because gilding makes something look like what it isn't. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are incredibly wondrous things that are happening in the digital Gilded Age, but below that patina are multiple other effects which aren't so wondrous. We've already talked about the impact on privacy, the impact on competition, the impact on truth. But in the original Gilded Age, there was huge market concentration. Oh my good, we got market concentration today. There was huge destruction of small businesses. Oh my goodness, we've seen that today. Just where's your local newspaper anymore? In the original Gilded Age, there was what I call politics of distraction, where racial, cultural, and religious issues were used to whip up the population to get people elected, and then they get into Congress and ignore those people and their issues. There was huge income inequality during the original Gilded Age. Oh, son of a gun. We've got that today as well. There was a change in the tempo of life in the original Gilded Age as we moved from the agricultural era to the industrial era. And so what I am, and so I draw those analogies in Techlash and say that yes, there were great things that happened, but there was also core issues that were being eaten away at in the original Gilded Age. And the same situation is today. I mean, you cannot, the marvels of what you and I are doing right now, for instance,
amazing. It's amazing.
But it's not without its costs. And so the history of technology is that the innovators make the rules until those rules, so self-serving rules, begin to impinge on the rights of others and the public interest, at which time we, the people, step in. And I think we're at that point now. And the purpose of writing Techlash, Who Makes the Rules in the Digital Gilded Age, was to make that point, to draw that analogy, and to suggest just how we might begin to get our arms around this new challenge.
I am so grateful. Tom, thank you so much. The metaverse may have slipped from the headlines as the lead and has been supplanted as AI in 2023. But these issues are pressing. It is not that it has gone away. I completely agree with you. I am really looking forward to reading Techlash, to staying in touch. I would love to build a bridge between the XR community with all of the people that I know have a real interest. And these are not, what we called them was, when the metaverse had its winter, the VR winter or its crash, a lot of people that really believe in the potential of it said, great, the tourists are gone.
Yeah.
And
it's a great line. Yeah.
We said the tourists are gone. And here, the people that were left behind were the ones that I felt understood the importance. They have a deep understanding of the ethical consequences and the ethical challenges. But these things often get drowned out by commerce. They get drowned out by marketers, advertisers, whoever comes in next. And we saw it with the internet. Right. So I think that this is why being proactive now, knowing what we know, is really going to be important. So Tom, thank you so much for of course.
Emily, thank you, and thank you for focusing on these kinds of issues. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to our next chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Tom.
a lot.